And I also wanted to say how particularly moved and enormously comforted my children and I were in a public response to Diana's death. It has been really quite remarkable and indeed in many ways overwhelming. And I think, as probably many of you will know from the experience of family loss perhaps in your own lives, it is inevitably very difficult to cope with grief at any time.
What if the fairy tale you believed in was never real? A story that seemed full of love and hope, hiding a truth that shocked the world decades later. How did a young princess, admired by millions, end up trapped in a life of loneliness and heartbreak? And what was the real story behind the man who stood beside her at the altar? For years, the world saw Prince Charles and Princess Diana as the perfect royal couple. But behind the smiles and celebrations, secrets were quietly shaping their lives. Could duty really outweigh love? And what happens when personal happiness is sacrificed for tradition and expectation? Today we dive into a story of love, betrayal, and regrets that span generations. From whispers in the palace corridors to public heartbreak, from private struggles to shocking confessions. This is the truth behind one of history's most famous marriages.
Prince Charles, new revelations about his marriage to Diana, what he was really like behind closed doors as a husband and a dad.
Prince Charles, the passions and paradoxes of an improbable life, includes never-before shared stories from people who knew the royal couple and about what really went on in one of the most high-profile marriages of the 20th century.
Are you ready to uncover what really happened behind the crown? The hidden pain behind the fairy tale. I speak to you today with a mix of sorrow and reflection. For decades, the truth about the royal marriage that captured the world's attention remained unspoken. And only recently, at the age of 75, King Charles finally admitted what so many had long suspected. He spoke of regret, pain, and a hidden truth that shaped not only his life, but also the lives of those closest to him, his children, his former wife Diana, and even the nation itself. "I should have spoken long ago," he confessed, his voice carrying the weight of years. The world listened in stunned silence. Some felt relief, some disbelief, others judgment. But no one could ignore the gravity of his words. Could this late admission heal old wounds, or would it simply reopen them? The story begins decades ago in the early 1980s. Buckingham Palace was alive with expectation. Charles, heir to the throne, was 32, and the pressure to marry weighed heavily on him. Every public appearance was under scrutiny, every photograph a question in waiting. When will he choose a bride? When Lady Diana Spencer entered the picture, it seemed as if the world had found its answer. Young, radiant, and from a respected family, she appeared to embody everything the monarchy needed. Engagement announcements were met with joy, and soon, every moment of their romance, every smile, every glance, was captured and celebrated. The world watched, thinking it was witnessing a real-life fairy tale. But behind the carefully curated images, another story was unfolding. Observers whispered that Charles's heart may not have been fully committed. His past attachment to Camilla Parker Bowles, a woman who had been part of his life long before Diana, cast a shadow over the public romance. Rumors of closeness between Charles and Camilla circulated even before the wedding, quietly undermining the perfect image projected to the world. Diana, in contrast, appeared every bit the ideal princess. The press adored her innocence, her charm, and the hope she seemed to bring for a new era. But behind palace walls, tensions simmered. Reports began to surface of distance between the couple, cold silences, mismatched priorities, and an emotional gap that Diana struggled to bridge. The fairy tale the public adored was not the reality the couple lived. By the mid-1980s, the sparkle of the royal wedding began to fade.
The Archbishop of Canterbury called the wedding of Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer today the stuff of fairy tales. And in spite of Scotland Yard's most elaborate security measures ever, there was a once-upon-a-time atmosphere in London as the 32-year-old heir to the British throne married the 20-year-old former kindergarten teacher.
Rumors of Charles's heart belonging elsewhere grew louder. Commentators questioned the palace, and Diana's image shifted in the public eye, from fairy tale princess to a woman quietly carrying a growing burden of loneliness. The stage was set for conflict. Private suspicions and whispers would soon become public crises. As the marriage progressed, the cracks widened. Diana, once celebrated as the nation's bright new hope, felt the pain of sharing her husband's heart with another. Charles's attachment to Camilla did not vanish with the wedding, and the strain on the royal household deepened year by year. Diana's suspicions sharpened over time. Odd hours, secretive phone calls, and subtle signs of meetings hinted that her fears were justified. She famously admitted, "There were 3 of us in this marriage," a statement that instantly resonated with the public and shifted sympathies firmly in her favor. What had once been a fairy tale in photographs now became a story of heartbreak and betrayal. The world began to see Charles not only as a prince, but as a man whose personal choices had caused real suffering. Crowds who once cheered for him now questioned his character. The seemingly perfect royal marriage had collapsed under the weight of hidden truths. And then came tragedy. On the night of August 31st, 1997, the world was stunned by news from Paris. Princess Diana had been in a fatal car accident. Flowers piled outside Kensington Palace, streets filled with mourners, and millions felt as if they had lost someone within their own families. Grief was immediate, raw, and unfiltered. But grief quickly turned to anger. Many blamed the royal family, and Charles in particular, for the loneliness Diana endured. Media outlets linked her suffering to Camilla's presence in Charles's life, creating a narrative of betrayal that spread across the globe. In the midst of mourning, the public looked to Charles not just as a widower, but as the man who had failed to protect the woman they loved. Inside the palace, grief took on a different form. William and Harry, young children at the time, faced the unimaginable loss of their mother. Their silence, their tears, and the bond they had shared with Diana became visible symbols of the tragedy. For Charles, this period required balancing private pain with public duty. He had to support his sons while managing his own complex emotions: loyalty to Camilla, sorrow for Diana, and the weight of responsibility as heir to the throne. The funeral became an iconic moment. Millions watched the young princes follow their mother's coffin, their faces etched with sorrow. The event captured the grief of a nation and reinforced the tension between personal loss and public expectation. Charles and Camilla before marriage. After Diana's death, Charles's life remained complicated. Publicly, he was expected to remain dignified, a widower defined by duty. But Camilla, the woman who had always been part of his heart, lingered in the background. Life without Diana did not mean freedom. It meant walking a narrow line, balancing remembrance with personal desire, grief with love, and public scrutiny with private loyalty. The relationship between Charles and Camilla continued quietly. Private dinners, late-night calls, and careful, discreet moments of connection became their reality. Yet every sighting sparked outrage among the public. Camilla was still associated with the broken marriage, and any appearance alongside Charles reopened wounds for Diana's supporters. The monarchy faced a delicate problem. Charles's bond with Camilla was undeniable, but public sentiment was still deeply tied to Diana's memory. Advisors suggested a slow, careful approach. Introduce Camilla gradually, without spectacle, to allow time for acceptance. The first appearances were subtle: charity events, small gatherings, and low-key engagements where her presence could be justified. Over time, the public reaction shifted. The anger softened slightly, though resentment remained. Newspapers moved from scathing commentary to cautious reporting. For Charles, patience became crucial. Every gesture, every photograph, every smile had to be measured against public perception. It was a balancing act between heart and duty. By 2005, years of careful planning and discreet appearances led to a breaking point. Charles and Camilla could no longer live in the shadows. After decades of waiting, the Prince of Wales made a controversial decision. He would marry the woman he had loved for so long.
After tying the knot in 2005, the Queen Consort is sharing what has kept their marriage, which was Charles's second following his divorce from the late Princess Diana in 1996 after 15 years together, going strong.
The announcement sparked immediate debate. To some, it was a long-awaited union of love surviving time and scandal. To others, it was betrayal, a reminder of the marriage that had failed and the woman who could never be replaced. The name Camilla carried the weight of Diana's memory and the pain of a royal marriage that had never been truly happy. The wedding itself reflected caution. Gone were the golden carriages, the grand processions, and the spectacle that had defined Diana's wedding. Instead, Charles and Camilla's ceremony was modest, understated, and deliberate. It was designed to honor their union while acknowledging the past. The public response was divided. Supporters celebrated the triumph of love over secrecy, while critics mourned Diana's absence and accused Charles of insensitivity. Yet within the palace, the marriage marked a turning point. Slowly, Camilla began to take her place within the monarchy, though comparisons to Diana were inevitable. Every smile, every appearance, every word was measured against Diana's enduring image. For Charles, the marriage allowed him a chance to live openly with love at last. For Camilla, it was a careful climb from outcast to official partner. And for the monarchy, it presented a challenge: how to honor the past without preventing the present from moving forward. Carrying the past into the present. Even after marrying Camilla, Charles could never fully step out from Diana's shadow. It was almost as though her presence lingered everywhere he went. She wasn't just remembered. She had become part of modern history. For the public, she wasn't simply a princess who had died too soon. She was the people's princess, someone who stood for kindness, compassion, and honesty. Whenever Charles and Camilla appeared together, Diana's memory hovered in the background. Newspaper covers compared them. Television specials replayed Diana's life. Documentaries analyzed every detail of her marriage and struggles. Even decades later, the public could not let go of Diana, because to them, she represented something much bigger than royalty. For Charles, this was complicated. On one side, Diana's popularity meant the monarchy remained alive in people's hearts. On the other, it meant that his own image was always judged against hers. No matter how hard he worked, no matter how many royal duties he performed, people still asked the same question: how could the man who hurt Diana ever sit on the throne? Charles kept moving forward with the responsibilities expected of him. He attended events, gave speeches, traveled for royal tours, and continued to support charities. He showed up exactly where tradition demanded him to be. On the surface, he looked like a man doing his duty. But behind that, silence pressed down heavier each year. He never once spoke openly about the reality of his marriage. He never explained what had gone wrong. The world knew only fragments, pieced together through gossip, interviews, and speculation. And every year on the anniversary of Diana's death, that silence was tested again. Crowds still brought flowers to Kensington Palace. Families wrote letters to Diana, thanking her for her kindness. Media outlets replayed the footage of her funeral, of young William and Harry walking behind her coffin. For Charles, each anniversary reopened old wounds. It was a reminder of the pain, but also of the questions left unanswered. And Charles knew something important. As long as he stayed silent, people would continue filling the gaps with their own stories. His silence was not protecting him. It was making things worse. Time moved on, and decades passed. Charles grew older. His children became adults with families of their own. He found stability with Camilla, but his past never disappeared. And when he reached the age of 75, he made a choice no one expected. He spoke. And he did not speak like a polished king delivering a prepared message. His words came from somewhere deeper. His tone carried regret. His sentences carried weight. He admitted that his silence had been a mistake. He admitted that he should have spoken long ago. He admitted that his marriage to Diana was not built on love, and that he had failed to say what everyone needed to hear. The confession was shocking. Not because people didn't know, many had already guessed the truth, but because it was finally said aloud. After decades of secrecy, the words came directly from the man at the center of it all. For some, the confession was a relief. At last, there was honesty. At last, someone admitted what had been obvious all along. For others, it was far too late. They said the words should have been spoken when Diana was still alive, when she was still suffering. But whether people accepted it or not, one thing was certain. The king had confessed. And nothing could erase the impact of that moment. The confession and its legacy. Charles's confession didn't undo the past, but it shifted the way people viewed him. For centuries, the monarchy survived by staying silent. Royals did not discuss personal struggles. The unwritten rule was clear. Never complain, never explain. They smiled on balconies, attended ceremonies, and kept private matters locked away. But with one confession, Charles broke that tradition. He explained, he admitted, he revealed what had been kept behind palace doors. For some, this was refreshing. It showed that the monarchy was human. It showed that behind the crown was a man capable of regret. For others, it was disappointing. They argued that a king should not speak about such things, that revealing private pain weakened the dignity of the crown. But whether people saw it as strength or weakness, the confession mattered. It changed the story. For Diana's supporters, it felt like long-awaited justice. For years, they had believed she was mistreated, that she was trapped in a loveless marriage. Charles's words confirmed their belief. Her pain, her struggle, her heartbreak, it was finally acknowledged, even by the man who caused it. But for others, the confession was bittersweet. They believed it came too late. Diana was gone. Her sons had grown up without her. Words now could not heal what had already been lost. And that's what gave the confession its weight. It was both healing and painful at once. For William and Harry, the impact must have been enormous. They had carried their mother's memory since childhood. They had walked behind her coffin, watched the world mourn her, and lived with the knowledge that their parents' marriage had been a battle. To hear their father finally admit his regret, it confirmed what they already knew, but it also reopened old scars. William carried the burden differently. As heir to the throne, he remained steady, careful, and restrained. He understood duty. He understood the need to protect the institution. Harry, on the other hand, chose honesty. He spoke openly about pain, about struggles, and eventually walked away from royal life altogether. Both paths reflected the influence of Diana, and both were shaped by her loss. The confession didn't only affect the family, it affected the entire monarchy. It raised difficult questions. If the monarchy demands duty above love, then what is the cost? If silence is chosen over honesty, what kind of damage does that cause? And if the crown forces people into roles they cannot handle, how much suffering follows? For Charles, the cost was a marriage that collapsed. For Diana, the cost was her peace, and possibly her life. And for the monarchy, the cost was public trust. The world today no longer believes in perfect fairy tales. People don't want to see a flawless royal family smiling from a balcony. They want truth. They want honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. Charles's confession, though late, gave them that. Diana's memory only grew stronger because of it. Her compassion, her openness, her ability to connect with people. These qualities stood in contrast to the silence of the crown. Her story became even more powerful, her legacy even brighter. The confession did not diminish her. It elevated her. Charles's words weren't only about himself. They were about what the monarchy represents. They were about how tradition, when taken too far, can destroy the very people it's meant to protect. They were about how silence can sometimes be more harmful than the truth. And they were about how regret never disappears. Because even kings live with the consequences of their choices. Even kings carry guilt. Even kings learn that sometimes the hardest words are the ones spoken too late. For Charles, the confession might have felt like a release. For the public, it was a revelation. But for history, it was a reminder. A reminder that love, duty, loss, and silence are not just private struggles. They shape nations. They shape legacies. They shape how the world remembers. And in the case of Diana, it showed that her story would always be bigger than the crown itself. Charles finally spoke, but Diana's voice was still louder. Her legacy, her memory, and her truth remained stronger than any confession. And that is something time, and even the crown, can never take away. And there you have it, the untold story behind one of the most famous royal marriages in history. A story of love, duty, secrets, and regrets that shaped not just a family, but the way the world sees the monarchy. It makes you wonder, can history ever truly forgive, or are some truths too heavy to carry, even for a king? The lives of Charles, Diana, and Camilla remind us that behind the crowns and palaces, real human emotions always play a role. Choices, mistakes, and secrets can echo for decades, leaving marks that even the world cannot forget. The heartbreak, the silences, the struggles. They are all reminders that royalty may wear a crown, but they are human, with fears, regrets, and longings like anyone else. If this story shocked you, moved you, or made you see the royal family in a new light, make sure to like this video and share it with friends who love royal stories. And we want to hear from you. Tell us in the comments which part of this story surprised or shocked you the most. Because no matter how glittering the crown may be, behind it are human stories full of heartbreak, courage, and the search for love. Stories that continue to shape history every day. They remind us that even in the most public lives, truth has a power all its own, waiting for the moment it can finally be told.